everyone. Hey, how's it going? My name is Brett Kluken. I'm one of the facilitators tonight. We're going to get started in a couple minutes. This is just a reminder that if you would like to speak during the public comment portion, it really helps us out. If you register out there, and then we'll give you a ticket. We do the speaking order by random drawing. That's how we've done it in previous years. And my preferred strategy, and quite frankly, the one we're implementing tonight. So if you have not registered to speak tonight and you think you're going to want to give public comments, please go outside right now and do so, okay? That would really help us out. Thank you. And again, we'll get started in just a couple minutes.
Just want to make sure you're here. Yes, we'll begin. If I can have everyone's attention. Good evening. I'm Bruce Watson, Chief of the Reactor Decommissioning Branch in the Division of Decommissioning Uranium Recovery Waste Programs, and will be chairing tonight's session. Our purpose is to obtain your comments on the Entergy Post-Shutdown Decommissioning Activities Report and the WholeTech license application and the related post-shutdown decommissioning report associated with it. I would like to highlight NRC's mission to protect public health and safety, promote the common defense and security, and protect the environment, and our current work related to the regulatory requirements during the decommissioning of power plants. I'd like to introduce a few of the NRC staff who will be here to listen to your comments, and hopefully we, the staff, can collectively answer questions on the decommissioning process. If we can't, we'll do our best to get back to you. So you've met Brett, our Region 1 counselor, who will be facilitating tonight's meeting, along with Donna Jonda, also from Region 1. Also in attendance is John Lamb, the current project manager for Pilgrim. Amy Snyder is here, who will be the decommissioning project manager when the plant shuts down and is transferred over to our organization. Also in attendance is Mike Duzanowski, our senior economist. Mike. Jason Piotr, senior engineer in our spent fuel management group. And Jesse Quintero, our environmental review specialist. And Ray Powell, our Region 1 branch chief that will be inspecting the plant during the decommissioning process. We also have some additional folks in the audience that if we need to, we can call on them to help us with comments or questions. Next slide, please. This is a NRC Category 3 public meeting to obtain comments on the Entergy PSDAR and the WholeTech application and their supplemental PSDR that's with it. These documents were made publicly available for comment. The meeting is being transcribed and will be made available for the public to review. There will also be a meeting summary published for the meeting. We have a planned short presentation by John Lamb, who will discuss the PSDAR process and license review process. Then Entergy and WholeTech will be given short presentations. Speaking for Entergy tonight is Mandy Halter. She is the Director of Nuclear Licensing. And Andrea Sturgis, who's from WholeTech, who is from also the Comprehensive Decommissioning International, who's the Vice President of Regulatory Programs, Environmental and Safety. After those presentations, we will turn the meeting over to Brett and Donna, who will begin the process to allow speakers to provide comments. It is my full intention, if we can, to end this meeting at 9 p.m. I also want to emphasize that this meeting is to discuss the upcoming permanent shutdown of the Pilgrim plant and the decommissioning process associated with it. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to give you, oops, skip the page. I want to just discuss a little bit of our decommissioning experience. We have many years of decommissioning experience. We have over 21 years experience with our current decommissioning regulations and have completed over 80 complex decommissionings and terminated those licenses. They have all been released for unrestricted use by the owner, so they can be used for any future purpose. And included in that 80 is 10 nuclear power plants. Next slide, please. On this slide is a picture of Yankee Row. It's located here in Row, Massachusetts. It's one of the 10 plants that was decommissioned. We terminated the license in 2007. Pictured on the left is the plant when it was in operation. Pictured on the right is where the plant was greenfielded by the utility associated with the requirements set up with the state. The NRC does not require site restoration as part of our process. One of the things I want to point out to you is that on the picture on the right, there's a hydroelectric dam that's been there for over 100 years. As you note, the nuclear plant operated, was decommissioned, and is gone. However, on the hill in the center there is a picture of the dry fuel storage facility that is still located under site and under license and will be continued to be inspected by our inspectors. Of course, the spent fuel is there awaiting the final disposition or of the high-level waste disposal, either interim or final repository here in the U.S. Next slide, please. I wanted to just briefly discuss the two decommissioning options discussed in the November 2008 submittals. Regardless of the option chosen, preparation of the decommissioning takes about 1 to 2 years to remove the radioactive waste stored on site, remove filters, resins, drain systems to allow the dismantling to begin and be done safely, or placed in storage. After decommissioning the preparation period, the licensee can go into either decon or safe store. Decon, or prompt remediation or prompt decommissioning, the licensee begins decommissioning activities and usually transfers the spent fuel to dry storage. Past experience has shown that decommissioning typically takes 7 to 10 years to complete. With safe store, the plant is placed in storage. We like to call it as cold and dark until the licensee decides to dismantle and decommission the plant. In safe store, the NRC will continue to inspect the plants at least annually and more frequently when decommissioning activities are performed. Regardless of the decommissioning option chosen, the NRC regulations require that the decommissioning be completed in 60 years. Next slide, please. A few reminders. We are here to listen to your comments on the Pilgrim decommissioning. This is part of the process we've set up, and it's intended to hear your comments so we can consider those in our review of both the PSDAR from Entergy and also the license application and the PSDR that supplements it from WholeTech. The meeting, again, is being transcribed, and the transcript will be publicly available. A meeting summary will be published and will be publicly available, and we will do our best to answer your questions where we can. There's going to be possibly some that we can't answer, but we will do our best to get back to you. Before I turn it over to, okay, and then so I'm going to introduce John. John Lamb's going to sit down and speak?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. My name is John Lamb. I am the project manager for Pilgrim at NRC headquarters in Rockville. I've been working for the NRC for 19 years, and prior to that, I worked 15 years in the power plant. In accordance, the next slide, please. In accordance with the NRC regulations, a post-shutdown decommissioning activities report, or PSDAR, must be submitted to the NRC and a copy to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts prior to or within 2 years following the permanent cessation of operations of Pilgrim. Entergy submitted the Pilgrim PSDAR on November 16, 2018. A PSDAR must contain a description of the planned decommissioning activities along with the schedule for their accomplishment and a site-specific decommissioning cost estimate, including the projected cost of managing irradiated fuel. The NRC staff uses a regulatory guide that provides guidance on the content and format of PSDARs. The regulatory guide is available to the public as noted on this slide. Entergy is prohibited from performing any major decommissioning activities until it certifies to the NRC that it has permanently ceased power operations at Pilgrim, has permanently removed fuel from the Pilgrim reactor vessel, and 90 days has passed since the NRC received its PSDAR. Decommissioning activities must not endanger the public, health, and safety or result in significant environmental impacts not previously reviewed. Next slide. A PSDAR must contain a discussion that provides the reasons for concluding that the environmental impacts associated with site-specific decommissioning activities will be bounded by appropriate previously issued environmental impact statements. Therefore, during the environmental review of a PSDAR, the NRC uses various previous staff reports to determine whether the environmental impacts from decommissioning are bounded by these reports. For instance, for Pilgrim, the NRC staff will use a generic environmental impact statement regarding decommissioning and will also look at previous environmental impact statements developed specifically for Pilgrim, such as the environmental impact statement developed for the renewal of the Pilgrim operating license. The NRC staff will also rely on findings from its inspection program. Next slide, please. The request for comment and meeting notice for the Pilgrim PSDAR was published in the Federal Register on December 21st, 2018. The 90-day comment period ends on March 21st, 2019. The NRC staff will notify the licensee if the staff needs additional information to support its review of the PSDAR. The NRC staff will document its PSDAR review in a letter to the licensee and will address the comments received during the comment period. After the submission of the Pilgrim PSDAR, the NRC regulations require that Entergy shall notify the NRC in writing and send a copy to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts before performing any decommissioning activity inconsistent with or making a significant schedule change from those actions and schedules described in the PSDAR. Next slide, please. By letter dated November 16, 2018, Entergy and WholeTech submitted a license transfer application requesting that the license for Pilgrim be transferred from Entergy to WholeTech. Before this transfer may be completed, the NRC must determine that WholeTech is qualified to be the holder of the Pilgrim license. In order to make this determination, the NRC staff reviews the following 5 areas: financial qualifications, decommissioning funding assurance, foreign ownership, control, and domination, technical qualifications, and insurance and indemnity. If the NRC finds that WholeTech is qualified in these areas, then it would approve the license transfer by an order and issue a conforming license amendment. Next slide, please. License transfer applications are noticed in the Federal Register, and the public can request a hearing and/or provide comments on the application. The Pilgrim license transfer application is ready for publication in the Federal Register. However, the Federal Register is currently impacted by the partial federal government shutdown. Therefore, the Pilgrim license transfer federal registration notification will not be published until after the partial federal government shutdown ends. Once this Federal Register notice is published, there will be a 20-day hearing period and then a 30-day comment period. License transfer applications typically contain proprietary information. A redacted, non-proprietary version of the Pilgrim license transfer application is available to the public and can be found online through the NRC's electronic library called Adams. The proprietary version can be requested using a process that will be described in the Federal Register notice. Next slide, please. By letter dated November 16, 2018, WholeTech submitted a proposed revised PSDAR for Pilgrim. The WholeTech PSDAR is a supplement to the license transfer application and therefore is part of the license transfer application action and not part of the Entergy PSDAR action. The WholeTech PSDAR is contingent upon the approval of the license transfer application and the equity sale closure. For purposes of this public meeting, the NRC will be accepting comments on both the Entergy PSDAR action and the license transfer application, which includes the proposed WholeTech PSDAR. Next slide, please. WholeTech also submitted a request for an exemption from the NRC's decommissioning trust fund requirements in an enclosure to the license transfer application. If this request were to be granted, then WholeTech would be allowed to use the Pilgrim Decommissioning Trust Fund not only for radiological decommissioning expenses, but also for expenses related to spent fuel management activities and site restoration activities. Like the WholeTech PSDAR, this exemption request is contingent upon the approval of the license transfer application and the equity sale closure. Next slide, please. Comments regarding the Entergy PSDAR can be submitted on regulations.gov website under docket ID NRC-2018-0286 until March 21st, 2019. Comments regarding the license transfer application can be submitted during tonight's public meeting. Once the license transfer application is noticed in the Federal Register, then comments can be submitted on the regulations.gov website under docket ID NRC-2018-0279 for a period of 30 days for comments, and a hearing can be requested for a period of 20 days. Next slide, please. This slide shows where to mail comments regarding Entergy PSDAR or the license transfer application. Please remember to use the docket ID associated with each application. That concludes my presentation. I'll turn it back over to Bruce.
Oh, okay. Our next speaker is Mandy Halter from Entergy. Yes, it's on.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Mandy Halter, and I'm the Director of Nuclear Licensing for Entergy Nuclear. With me tonight is Mike Toomey, the Vice President of External Affairs for Entergy Wholesale Commodities. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight to provide you information on Entergy's plans to decommission the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station. 2019 is a significant year for Entergy, for Pilgrim, and for this area. On May 31st of this year, Pilgrim will permanently cease power operations. In June, we will certify to the NRC that the reactor is permanently shut down and defueled. Also in June, Pilgrim will complete its first staffing reduction as we transition the organizational structure to support Pilgrim's Safe Store decommissioning plan. Throughout the final months of plant operation and as we transition to decommissioning, we remain committed to safety, health, and security of the plant, its employees, and you, the public. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. The Entergy Post-Shutdown Decommissioning Activities Report, or PSDAR, was submitted to the NRC on November 16, 2018, and outlines our plan to use the Safe Store decommissioning strategy. Our PSDAR was prepared by a team of experts in accordance with regulations, NRC guidance, and a thorough review of PSDARs submitted to the NRC by plants in decommissioning. The Pilgrim PSDAR contains a description of our planned decommissioning activities, as well as a schedule for their completion, an estimate of the cost, and a discussion of the environmental impacts of these activities. And I will provide more information in the following slides. Next slide, please. The majority of the dormancy period of our Safe Store plan will involve all spent fuel and dry fuel storage. This slide shows our plan to achieve the dry fuel storage dormancy state by the end of 2022. Along the way, Pilgrim will make adjustments to its staffing levels and the emergency plan in accordance with appropriate regulatory approvals based on the status of the fuel and the corresponding decreasing risk of off-site radiological consequences from an accident. Next slide, please. Under the Safe Store methodology, we will maintain and monitor Pilgrim in a dormancy period to allow for the radioactive decay of the plant, followed by the dismantlement and decontamination to permit NRC license termination within 60 years as required by regulations. Under Entergy's plan, radiological decontamination and dismantlement will occur safely by the year 2079. We plan to restore the site following license termination. Next slide, please. In accordance with regulations, we developed a site-specific estimate of the costs for the planned Safe Store decommissioning activities at Pilgrim. This cost estimate was developed by a leading expert using up-to-date and best available data. In addition to estimating the costs associated with license termination, we also estimated the costs associated with spent fuel management and site restoration. Our Safe Store decommissioning cost estimate for Pilgrim is included as an attachment to the Entergy PSDAR. Next slide, please. The site-specific decommissioning cost estimate submitted to the NRC in November 2018 was reported using 2018 dollars and up-to-date 2018 pricing information. The total estimated costs associated with license termination, as well as spent fuel management and site restoration for Pilgrim, is $1.66 billion. We will periodically update the decommissioning cost estimate throughout the Safe Store period in accordance with regulations. It is very important to note that we are required by regulation as the owner of the plant to demonstrate reasonable assurance that there are adequate funds available to cover the cost of license termination. We provide this funding for Pilgrim through a nuclear decommissioning trust fund, which, as reported to the NRC and the PSDAR, was funded at $1.05 billion at the end of October 2018. Accounting for the growth of these funds over time, as permitted by NRC methodology, the Pilgrim Nuclear Decommissioning Trust balance does provide financial assurance for the decommissioning costs of our Safe Store plan. Next slide, please. We have concluded that the environmental impacts associated with planned Safe Store decommissioning activities at Pilgrim are less than and are bounded by impacts addressed in previously issued environmental impact statements. A more detailed discussion of the reasons for our conclusion is included in the PSDAR. Next slide, please. In November 2018, we filed an updated Pilgrim spent fuel management plan with the NRC, which outlines our intent to store all spent fuel on a new, larger, independent spent fuel storage installation pad, which will be located at a higher elevation on the Pilgrim site. This pad, which we plan to construct by the end of 2020, will store a total of 61 casks, including the 17 casks that are on the current pad, as well as 44 additional casks, which are needed to store the fuel that is currently in the reactor vessel and the spent fuel pool. Next slide, please. In November 2018, Entergy and WholeTech submitted a request to the NRC to transfer the control of Pilgrim's plant and ISFSI licenses from Entergy to WholeTech. If approved by the NRC, the license transfer will allow for prompt decommissioning under WholeTech's plan, which is different than Entergy's plan. Specifically, WholeTech plans to decommission Pilgrim using the DECON, or immediate dismantlement strategy, by approximately 2024. Additionally, WholeTech intends to move all spent fuel to dry fuel storage on the new pad by the end of 2021. Following this presentation, Andrea Sturgis will provide more information on WholeTech's decommissioning plans for Pilgrim. A major benefit of decommissioning under WholeTech's plan is that it will allow for earlier release of portions of the Pilgrim site for reuse. We have requested that the NRC review and approve the license transfer application by May 31st of this year. We know that this is an aggressive review schedule for the staff, and we are certain that the NRC will conduct a very diligent review, and we expect nothing less. The intent behind this requested timeline is to provide certainty to the plant employees and to the citizens of Plymouth and the surrounding areas on plant ownership, as well as the decommissioning plan and timeline following plant shutdown. Next slide, please. More information about Pilgrim's plans for decommissioning, as well as our related submittals that we've provided to the NRC, are publicly available on our website, www.pilgrimpower.com. I thank you for your time, and a number of us are here from Entergy, and we look forward to answering your questions later in the evening. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Our next presentation is by Andrea Sturgis from WholeTech International and CDI, I believe it's called.
Thank you, Bruce. Good evening. I really appreciate the opportunity to provide you all with a brief overview of the post-shutdown decommissioning activities report that has been prepared to show the WholeTech plan for initiating prompt decommissioning following NRC approval of the license transfer application, execution of the license transfers, and completion of the sale closure. Next slide, please. On this slide, you can see that I am up here providing the presentation. I'm Andrea Sturgis. I'm the Vice President for Regulatory Programs, Environment, and Safety for Comprehensive Decommissioning International. I am joined tonight by Joy Russell, Senior Vice President for WholeTech International. Next slide. On November 16th, 2018, WholeTech submitted a revised post-shutdown decommissioning activities report, or PSDAR, based on their plan to initiate prompt decon. Our PSDAR for decon includes a description of the planned activities, and specifically the activities that are required to initiate that prompt decon and complete it. It also includes a planned decon decommissioning schedule and a cost estimate reflecting that schedule and the decon plan. Lastly, it includes a discussion of the environmental impacts for the specific activities that will be performed during the execution of the dismantlement and the waste removal from the site to complete the radiological decommissioning. The PSDAR was prepared in accordance with NRC regulations and addresses NRC guidance. It was prepared by a team that is experienced in planning, estimating, and executing nuclear power plant decommissioning. It was also informed by a review of previously submitted PSDARs, as well as particularly a review and an alignment with the assumptions that were provided and used in the Entergy SafeStore PSDAR. The decon PSDAR is contingent upon NRC approval of the license transfer, execution of the transfers of the license, and completion of the sale. Next slide, please. The decon PSDAR reflects WholeTech's plan to promptly start decommissioning activities following the license transfer and sale closure. The schedule reflects the project goal to achieve partial site release within 8 years. The decommissioning cost estimate reflects decon activities and schedule for completing radiological decommissioning, managing the spent fuel, and completing site restoration activities. The environmental evaluation considers the decon activities and provides evidence that those activities are bounded by the existing environmental impact statements that are applicable to the Pilgrim site, including the NRC generic environmental impact statement for decommissioning, as well as the Pilgrim site license renewal environmental impact statement. If you look at the SafeStore PSDAR and compare the decommissioning cost estimate with that provided in our PSDAR for decon, you will see some differences. Those differences are primarily driven by two reasons. First, the core business for Entergy in current time is to provide and generate power electricity. The core business for WholeTech, including CDI, is managing spent fuel and executing decommissioning projects. And therefore, the WholeTech team has the latest technology, the engineering expertise, and the project management expertise to apply cost and time-effective methods for decommissioning, resulting in a difference in the decommissioning cost. In addition, the decon plan eliminates the transition to the dormant state, maintaining that plant dormant state for almost 40 years, and the transition to reactivate the plant and complete the dismantlement and waste removal activities about 40 years down the road. It's important to note that the SafeStore dismantlement and waste removal schedule and the decon dismantlement and waste removal schedule are similar in duration. The difference is the prompt decon, one modeled in our PSDAR, is initiated immediately after license transfer in 2019 and completes in approximately 5 years. On the next slide, please. The schedule provided in the decon PSDAR assumes that the NRC will approve the license transfer application in time to support a July 31st transfer of the licenses and sale closure. This slide provides some key assumptions that drove the schedule that's included in that PSDAR, starting with the fact that we've assumed an initiation of decontamination and dismantlement activities in 2019 following the license transfer. It also assumes that the newest ISFSI pad construction is completed and the pad is available for use in 2020. It assumes that the offloading of the spent fuel, transitioning the site from a combined wet and dry spent fuel storage site to a dry fuel storage site only, occurs by the fourth quarter of 2021. Similar to the SafeStore PSDAR schedule submitted by Entergy, our Decon PSDAR schedule assumes that the DOE completes the spent fuel removal from the site in the 2062 time period. The Decon PSDAR schedule shows radiological decommission, except for the Independent Spent Fuel Storage Installation, or ISFSI, is accomplished within 5 years following the transfer, with approximately 5 years following the license transfer and sale closure. It also assumes that site restoration activities, which are not required for the partial site release approval by the NRC, are continuing beyond that approximately 1 year. Next slide, please. The WholeTech DCE, or decommissioning cost estimate, that's included in the Decon PSDAR results in approximately $1.134 billion cost in 2018 dollars. The Nuclear Decommissioning Trust Fund for Pilgrim is currently valued at $1.05 billion as of October 31st, 2018. The cash flow analyses that were submitted as part of the license transfer application, as well as the Decon PSDAR and decommissioning cost estimate, demonstrate that the Pilgrim Nuclear Decommissioning Trust Fund contains sufficient funds to cover our plan for radiological decommissioning, spent fuel management, and site restoration. It's important to note that pursuant to NRC regulations, we will be required as the licensee to prepare and submit an annual report that provides the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust Fund status, including expenses and activities executed in the previous year, the remaining NDT balance, and showing financial assurance that the balance can address and cover the remaining costs of all the activities required to complete the license termination. This is a public report and is made available each year by the NRC. With that, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'd like to thank the NRC for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Before I turn the meeting over to Brett and Donna to facilitate the comment session, I would like to invite any elected officials or their representatives or any Native American tribe representatives to make statements. And you're available now. So if you would, those that are interested, please come up to the microphone and state your name for the record.
So we actually have a couple who have pre-registered with us, and we're going to go down through that list, and then we'll open it up to those who did not pre-register. So first up, we're going to have Ms. Jessica Wong from the office of Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Good evening, thank you. As Brad said, my name is Jessica. I am from Senator Elizabeth Warren's office, and I am her regional director. So Senator Warren reiterates her deep concerns with the consistently poor public safety record at Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's pattern of ignoring critical discrepancies in Entergy's safety measures that put Massachusetts residents at risk. This cannot continue, especially as the NRC reviews the license transfer for the decommissioning, from Entergy to WholeTech International. To date, she has sent 6 letters from the NRC expressing these concerns, most recently in October, following the reports of unplanned shutdowns due to problems with equipment. Entergy cannot continue to use the summer's planned shutdown as an excuse to avoid much-needed safety upgrades that protect our communities. Senator Warren urges the company to prioritize the people of southeastern Massachusetts over its profits. Similarly, the the NRC can no longer shirk its responsibilities to establish and enforce proper safety standards. The Senator once again calls on the NRC to require Entergy to immediately comply with federal safety standards, and if they refuse to do so, then the NRC must take necessary steps to shut down the plant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we will have Ms. Rory Clark from the office of Senator Ed Markey.
Thank you for having me. As you said, I'm Rory Clark. I'm Senator Markey's Regional Director. I'll be reading a statement on Senator Markey's behalf. I've long been concerned about Pilgrim's safety and operating record and its management's history of cutting corners at the expense of increased risk to Massachusetts residents. As we turn our attention now to the details of the post-shutdown decommissioning activities reports submitted by Entergy and WholeTech International, I must remind the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Entergy, and WholeTech that the people of Massachusetts will settle for nothing less than the most stringent safety measures. As the federal regulatory body overseeing the decommissioning process, we all expect the NRC will review both Entergy and WholeTech's proposed decommissioning plans with the utmost of care and caution. Safety of Massachusetts residents demands this thorough review. Plans for the ownership and decommissioning of Pilgrim must prioritize safety and security. The NRC must evaluate both Entergy and WholeTech's PSDARs to ensure that each provides a comprehensive accounting of how that owner will assume responsibility for safe operations, improve upon the abysmal safety record at Pilgrim, and finance the complete decommissioning process. I understand that it is common practice for the NRC to issue exemptions that would limit the required emergency planning zone when a plant begins decommissioning process, but I must urge the NRC to require Pilgrim's owner, be it Entergy or WholeTech, to work with local communities to maintain and fund a significant emergency planning zone and ensure that local communities are prepared for any eventuality. Last year, I was proud to co-sponsor the Safe and Secure Decommissioning Act, which would prohibit the NRC from issuing waivers or granting exemptions from complying with safety and emergency preparedness regulations put forth in the Atomic Energy Act of 1954 until nuclear fuel had been transferred to spent nuclear fuel dry casks. I will continue to push for all parties involved in the decommissioning of Pilgrim to abide by such standards. As we are all aware, this region is home to fierce nor'easter storms and rising tides, posing safety concerns that other nuclear facilities around the country do not have to contend with. Especially given this region's harsh environmental conditions, the NRC should ensure the completion of a full National Environmental Policy Act analysis that would examine the effect of the proposed decommissioning plans on the environment and allow for additional public involvement. Furthermore, any Pilgrim licensee should provide thorough plans for communicating regularly with the public and local stakeholders throughout the decommissioning process. This communication is essential to ensure that all members of the community understand how Pilgrim will be safely decommissioned and to ensure that all members of the community understand how Pilgrim will be safely decommissioned and foster confidence that security measures satisfy federal safety standards and community expectations. I was proud to be an original co-sponsor of additional legislation in 2018 entitled the Nuclear Plant Decommissioning Act, which would ensure the states and local communities have a meaningful role in the crafting and preparation of decommissioning plans for retired nuclear plants located in their community. This bill also requires the NRC to publicly and transparently approve or reject every proposed decommissioning plan, which it currently is not required to do. I will be introducing the Dry Cask Storage Act this session, which would ensure every nuclear reactor operator must be compelled to comply with an NRC-approved plan that would require the safe removal of spent nuclear fuel from spent nuclear fuel pools and place that fuel into dry cask storage within 7 years of the time the plan is submitted to the NRC. This bill would further provide funding to help reactor licensees implement these plans and would expand the emergency planning zone for all non-compliant reactor operators to 50 miles. As we consider tonight the shutdown process for Pilgrim, Entergy and WholeTech must provide conclusive proof that there are sufficient funds available to the nuclear decommissioning trust to decommission Pilgrim in a safe and secure manner. It would be unacceptable for Entergy or WholeTech to demand additional money from Massachusetts ratepayers to complete the decommissioning process at Pilgrim. There can be no second chances here. Historical data and NRC guidelines indicate that the decommissioning costs are likely to increase faster than inflation. Entergy and WholeTech must each account for that fact or find a way to clearly rebut it. Given the amount currently available in the trust fund, the NRC must carefully assess if the proposed decommissioning timeline is achievable in a safe and secure manner, and require that there is a reasonable public assurance of available funds for the totality of the process. Additionally, as the proposed license transfer will further strain the NRC's resources, it is imperative the NRC assign additional staff to work on these issues and charge the licensees for their salaries. In recent past, I've also expressed my concerns to the NRC regarding the draft decommissioning rule currently awaiting review, which is intended to provide clear guidelines for all plants that are undergoing the decommissioning process. This proposal falls far short of the NRC's stated goals of providing for a safe, effective, and efficient decommissioning process for nuclear plants. In its current form, this fails to propose a comprehensive set of decommissioning and cleanup regulations, would result in the automatic approval of facilities exemptions from safety, security, and emergency planning regulations, and would continue to rubber stamp the industry's post-shutdown decommissioning activities report. I continue to urge the NRC to reject this draft and instead write a rule that will affirmatively guide plants and communities through the decommissioning process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we will have Mr. Michael Jackman of the Office of Congressman Bill Keating.
Thank you. I do have a statement from the Congressman I'd like to read, but before I do that, I have just some housekeeping questions. The slide presentations that were made tonight, are those available online, or will they be available online?
For the record, yes. They will
Okay.
be made available online on the NRC's website.
Okay, only because I think if people want to make comments both on the PSDAR and the license transfer, there's a lot of good information in there. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to address you at tonight's public meeting. Unfortunately, the House voting schedule prevents me from being here in person. But I wanted to restate my opinion that as we draw closer to the cessation of operations at Pilgrim, the rigorous scrutiny of the operations at the plant must continue. Entergy must not be allowed to languish in column 4, representing the minimum level of operational safety for the remainder of its life as a power generating plant. In addition, the NRC must scrutinize Entergy's and WholeTech's post-shutdown decommissioning activities reports to ensure that the health and safety of Massachusetts residents is not at risk. The NRC must enforce its regulations and require the licensee to adhere to the most stringent standards for facility security, cybersecurity for all of the plant systems, structural integrity of the on-site dry cast storage system, and mitigation of environmental hazards. In addition, decommissioning activities must be fully funded by the licensee, and the NRC must do all it can to ensure that taxpayers, be they residents of Plymouth, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, or the United States of America, are not left to shoulder the burden of the costs of the cleanup of the Pilgrim site. Given the real prospect of ongoing nuclear waste storage here in Plymouth, it is incumbent upon all levels of government to work together to ensure the safety of our residents. It is imperative that those residents and residents of all affected communities in Plymouth County, the Cape, and the islands are included in the discussions and decisions involved with the decommissioning process. The Plymouth Town Select Board, the State Legislative Delegation, the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel, private groups like Pilgrim Watch and Cape Downwinders, and many other concerned individuals and groups. All have been engaged in this vital discussion over the years, and they all deserve to have their input heard and incorporated into the decision-making process. I am proud to have co-sponsored legislation, which Rory referred to, the Nuclear Plant Decommissioning Act, that will do just that. I applaud all those present tonight for sharing their perspectives, and I will continue to fight to make sure that your voices are heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we will have Mr. Seth Scofield from the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office.
Thank you, Brett. Good evening. I'm Seth Scofield, Senior Appellate Counsel and Assistant Attorney General in the Energy and Environment Bureau of the Office of Attorney General Maura Healey. First, I'd like to thank the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for coming to Plymouth tonight so that the public has an opportunity to voice their thoughts and concerns about the power plant and the proposed plans to decommission the plant following its shutdown this spring. From the Attorney General's perspective, the proposed sale of Pilgrim and the related transfer of Pilgrim's operating license from Entergy to a WholeTech subsidiary raise significant health, safety, environmental, and financial concerns for the Commonwealth and its citizens. We appreciate the potential benefits of accelerated decommissioning that forms the basis for the sale and license transfer application, but we currently have serious concerns about whether Pilgrim's Decommissioning Trust Fund contains sufficient funds to cover the performance of all necessary decommissioning, site restoration, and spent fuel management activities on an indefinite basis. As currently proposed, neither WholeTech Pilgrim LLC, the proposed licensee, nor WholeTech Decommissioning International LLC, the proposed license operator, will generate any revenue or bring with them any new assets that could be used to fund and complete site decommissioning, restoration, and spent fuel management activities at the site. Instead, WholeTech Pilgrim and WholeTech Decommissioning International's only planned source of funds are the funds currently existing in the Pilgrim's Trust Fund, and as currently proposed, there exists no guaranteed path to the parent company of those two single-purpose limited liability companies to compensate for any funding shortfall in the trust fund. If there are insufficient funds in the trust fund, WholeTech would likely default on its obligation and likely leave the Commonwealth and its taxpayers with those obligations, both as the payer of last resort and the party responsible for protecting public safety and the environment for an indefinite period. Based on our preliminary review of the license transfer application in the revised post-shutdown decommissioning activities report, we have reason to believe that a trust fund shortfall could very well occur. For example, WholeTech's estimate of what it will cost to decommission, restore, and manage spent fuel at the site is only $3.615 million less than the total amount of money expected to be in the trust. That means there would be insufficient funds to cover any cost overrun in excess of $3.6 million. Past experience, however, including decommissioning experience at other sites in New England, demonstrates that the potential discovery of previously unidentified radiological and non-radiological contamination, potential unanticipated work delays, and other potential problematic events could well drive costs significantly beyond preliminary post-shutdown decommissioning cost estimates. For example, the discovery of strontium-90 during decommissioning at Connecticut Yankee doubled the anticipated decommissioning costs there. The discovery of highly contaminated groundwater during decommissioning at Maine Yankee also increased costs beyond those anticipated to decommission that site. And the discovery of PCB contamination, radiological groundwater contamination, during decommissioning at Yankee Row similarly caused significant and unanticipated cost increases. WholeTech and its partner, SNC Lavalin, have poor track records on other projects at other sites around the country, which amplifies the Commonwealth's concerns about the potential for cost overruns, delays, and other issues that will both imperil public safety in our environment, while at the same time enhancing the risk of a trust fund shortfall that would make matters even worse. For example, the NRC just recently issued a notice of violation related to WholeTech's mishandling of a dry cask loading and transfer operations at San Onofre Nuclear Generation Station in California, and its failure to timely report that matter to the NRC. Because of the significant risks to the Commonwealth embodied by the pending license transfer proposal, we implore the NRC to join us in closely scrutinizing the proposal's terms and ensure that substantial financial assurances exist to ensure that those risks are fully addressed. To that end, the Attorney General intends, on behalf of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to intervene in the pending license transfer proceeding to articulate these and other concerns for evaluation by the Commission and the imposition of protective safeguards and other conditions with respect to any license transfer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have several authorized representatives from the Board of Selectmen of the Town of Duxbury.
Good evening. I'm Mary Lambert, speaking tonight on behalf of the Duxbury Board of Selectmen. The town is very concerned the site will not be properly cleaned up due to reliance on a GEIS written in 2002 and an SEIS written in 2006 that are outdated, incomplete, and ignore new and significant information. The failure of NRC to require a NEPA analysis as required by federal law and legal precedent, and the insufficient funds in the DTF. With respect to the GEIS and SEIS, Duxbury sees no rational basis for NRC to assume that the environmental impacts are bounded by these documents, nor that environmental impacts will be small or that the site is essentially clean. It is not. A few examples. The SEIS incorrectly denies that the National Academy's Biological Effects of Radiation Report 2006 denies it provides new and significant information from the 1990 report. The 2006 report found mortality rates for women exposed to radiation were 37.5% higher than its 1990 report, and the impact of allowable radiation standards on workers was twice that estimated in 1990. Therefore, allowable doses need to be reduced from the 25 millirem a year to less than 10 millirem a year, as the state is requested, and reduction in allowable doses to workers. You are obligated to follow the latest scientific information, not go back to 1990. Second, contamination on site must be updated. In the GEIS and SEIS, NRC didn't lift a shovel. You just relied on the licensee's reports. Their conclusions cannot be relied upon. Pilgrim opened with bad fuel and no off-gas treatment system and blew its filters in 1982. Where did the contamination go? Hazardous waste is buried on site, including on the property off the access road. Construction has occurred at the site and the soil buried. What's in that soil? There's a crack in the reactor's torus floor. Soil outside the reactor beneath it must be analyzed. The source of tritium levels in monitoring wells is unknown. Other slower moving radionuclides also are likely to be there, not yet picked up by the monitoring wells. Also, what is leaked from the seismic gaps in the condensate system. Again, who knows? It's not in the 2002 report. It's not in the SEIS written in 2006. NRC's 2014 continued storage rule that the waste may be stored on site indefinitely has to be considered. The PSDAR's assumptions that spent fuel will be off-site by 2062 cannot be accepted by NRC. Entergy relied on DOE for its projections, but DOE qualified its projections. Entergy and WholeTech did not. PSDAR cost estimates and plans to ensure the long-term integrity of the CAS must be revised to provide a contingency fund for long-term storage. NRC's Mark Lambert stated that there is no technology to find cracks in WholeTech CAS. They're made of steel and subject to corrosion. Dr. Chris Singe, the president of WholeTech, said that it's not feasible to repair WholeTech steel canisters. These facts cannot be ignored. CAS must be better protected, monitored for heat, helium, and temperature, and funds for mitigation included in cost estimates, because the fuel, as NRC has said, could remain here indefinitely in an environment subject to corrosion, moisture, and salt. The GEIS and SES found socioeconomic impacts small. Again, not so. A University of Massachusetts Amherst study commissioned by the town of Plymouth found that the economic impact on Plymouth alone would be almost $500 million, and that there would be more than $100 million impact on the rest of the region, including Duxbury. Conclusion, therefore, it's clear that the GEIS and SEIS are totally inadequate and do not bound the environmental impact. The NRC must require both a comprehensive environmental analysis that includes shovels and testing made public, quite obviously, at the beginning of the decommissioning process, and a NEPA analysis. This is a major federal reaction. You cannot pretend it is mere oversight to wiggle your way out of the requirement. You gave the license, and you will terminate the license. That is a major federal action, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Jim Lambert, and I'm also here representing the Duxbury Board of Selectmen, and I'd like to speak briefly on just one aspect. The Selectmen and the town of Duxbury have serious concerns about the financial aspects of decommissioning. You heard Senator Markey's representative, Senator Warren's representative, Representative Keating's representative, and the Attorney General's office refer to these. WholeTech's PSDAR, like Entergy's, says there is enough money in the Decommissioning Trust Fund to accomplish the job. Putting aside all of the things that PSDAR doesn't talk about that Mrs. Lambert just listed, that assumption by Entergy and WholeTech rests on a further assumption that future costs in decommissioning will not be more than future increases in general inflation. That assumption is highly questionable. According to Callan Associates, that annually puts together a report on decommissioning costs for the nuclear industry, decommissioning costs increased at an annual rate of about 5.8% between 2008 and 2016. This increase in costs is about 4.5% above inflation. For a benchmark, the NRC and the PSDARs assume that the trust fund will grow at a rate of only 2% of general inflation. The NRC's own questions and answers on decommissioning financial assurance say that over a 20-year period, there will be an annual increase in decommissioning costs of between 5 and 9%. Again, well over both inflation and 2% above inflation. If the NRC's statements are correct, and if Callahan's reports of actual past history are correct, it seems highly unlikely that there's going to be enough money in the fund to accomplish the job. Which leads me to a fundamental question of the Board of Selectmen. If there is not enough money, what law or regulation requires a licensee, particularly a limited liability corporation like WholeTech Pilgrim, or any of its parent or associated entities, to pay the shortfall? Can you tell me if there is such a regulation? And if so, tell me what it is. And if you cannot do so now, can I ask that you tell us all tomorrow night at the decommissioning panel meeting to give you the time to get the answer?
Thank you.
Rebecca Chin for the town of Duxbury. The selectmen asked me to speak on public safety this evening, and we urge you to retain the current off-site emergency planning funded by the licensee until the spent fuel pool is emptied and continue licensee-funded off-site emergency planning on a reduced level until all the fuel leaves the site. Entergy has currently filed for a license exemption to end off-site and reduce on-site funding, and this should be denied by the NRC. You cannot expect mutual aid with no funding. The second is on monitoring. Mass Department of Public Health should continue to expand off-site radiological monitoring and on-site tritium monitoring. The licensee should continue to provide Mass Department of Public Health with its funding. It needs to be required of the licensee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sheila Lynch Benton in Duxbury, speaking on behalf of the Board of Selectmen. I would like to address one issue. 40 years ago, when community safety was being addressed, telephone poles and speakers were the technology of the time. Currently, in our town of Duxbury, which is within the 5-mile zone of Pilgrim, we have an old colony network, digital network, of public safety address. I would like WholeTech, if they are going to start next July, to engage the regional fire departments and the old colony system of current digital notification to be engaged in community safety and planning during the 3 very important years, especially after what just happened in California with the accident. If there's an accident during the WholeTech time, if they're given the license, and you're not up to date with the current fire department technologies in the region, it will be a very tragic day. So I encourage WholeTech, if they're given the license in July, to reach out to the regional fire departments in the emergency notification system, which has been greatly upgraded since 40 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other elected officials or representatives of elected officials or representatives of federally recognized tribes who would like to introduce themselves this evening before we move on to the public comment portion? All right, hearing none, I would like to introduce Donna Janda, and we will proceed with the public comment portion.
Thanks, Brett. Good evening, everyone. As Brett said, my name is Donna Janda, and I'll be facilitating tonight's meeting along with Brett. For those of you who registered to speak, you should have received a ticket, the other half of which Brett has in a container over here. And the speaking order is going to be determined by the numbers that are pulled from the container. And the intent of this is so that the speaker order is just random. So I do want to emphasize there is no prohibition against donating your ticket to others. You are free to do so. However, both individuals should be present at the time that number is called, and the donation must be announced at that time. And in addition, if an individual has already spoken during the meeting as a result of someone donating their ticket, and then that individual's ticket is called, that individual may not use that ticket, that they can donate it to someone else. This is just to give opportunity to everyone to be able to speak. So when your number's called, please queue up to the microphone that's in the aisle, in the center aisle right there. And if you need to have a microphone brought to you, just let us know and Brett will take care of that for you. And just so you have some advance warning of when it's your turn to speak, Brett's posting the numbers right now as I'm speaking, and we're going to just go down them in sequential order there. In an effort to give everybody the opportunity to speak tonight, please limit yourself to 3 minutes when speaking. We do have a clock here on this table in the center here in front of the podium, and we'll count down those 3 minutes. And after the 3-minute mark, I'll politely ask you to conclude your remarks. For your awareness, the meeting tonight is being recorded, and there is a transcript that will be generated after the meeting. Both the audio and the transcript will be posted to the NRC website. So in light of that, I would ask when it's your turn to speak that you please identify yourself. I would also ask, for the sake of the audio recording, that people not speak over each other. I would also ask that we keep this area clear in front of the stage. If there is something you'd like to give to the NRC staff, you can give that to Brett, and he'll take care of that. And now, just some basic ground rules to go over. While recognizing many of you have strongly held opinions concerning the matters that were discussed tonight, I ask that you nonetheless adhere to civil decorum, that you respect each other. So please do not disrupt each other. Just as you wouldn't want to be interrupted during your 3 minutes at the microphone, please respect the speaking time of others. Any threatening gestures or statements will under no circumstances be tolerated and will be cause for immediate ejection from the meeting. If you feel you've been threatened, please let me know, or please tell one of the NRC security personnel or police officers in the room, and we will try and address that. The one thing I do want to also note, and I haven't heard any tonight, but please make sure you silence your cell phones so that doesn't disrupt the meeting. And I think we are ready to go at that. So the first number on the list is number 2. Okay, would you like to donate that ticket to somebody else to speak?
Did anyone who didn't sign up yet to speak like to speak right now? All right, so let's break this down. So this system is designed, I actually just experienced this at a Westinghouse meeting in South Carolina where we didn't have that many number of speakers. So this is everyone. This is everyone who signed up to speak. So we have 14 people who signed up to speak. So there will likely be some opportunity at the end after these individuals have spoken. If you haven't signed up to speak to go, or if you decide after hearing comments to speak then. So what the plan is just to move through these numbers and then, again, open it up after that. I'm still going to keep people to the 3 minutes, and then if people have additional things to say after that, once we've gotten through the list, and whether there's any additional people who would like to speak, then we can, add on a second round as time permitting, okay? So, does anyone want to use the number 2 ticket? If not, we will move on to the number 12 ticket. Pass, all right. Look at the time we are making this evening. The number 1 ticket. Do you want to go? All right, go. All right.
Mary Lambert for Pilgrim Watch. I just want to amplify the concern of our town and other speakers of maintaining licensee responsibility for off-site emergency planning in full force as it is now, whatever it is, until the pool is emptied and then ratcheted down until fuel leaves the site. What is not properly considered by NRC or the licensees is our acts of malice. We know there is a heightened threat environment, and we know that the spent fuel pool is a vulnerable target, as demonstrated by an expert for our Attorney General, Dr. Gordon Thompson, during relicensing. We know also that even in a cask, they are vulnerable to acts of malice by a shoulder-launched missile, for example, and then in the hole putting an explosive. This is described in excruciating detail, again, by Dr. Thompson, both in hearings in the United States, recent ones, and in Canada. So you have to consider it. The fact that the probability may be low, you cannot take an arithmetic view to it because of the consequences being so great as they are. And consider also, we are very glad that the ISFI pad has been moved to higher ground. However, unfortunately, it wasn't moved to the Manomet side. It was moved more towards, I'd say, the Duxbury side. And it is very, very close to Rocky Hill Road. So we have gained a great deal by not having it subject to climate change effects, but we've lost on security. Therefore, we need a reinforced barrier or some measure, a building or something to provide the security we need, because the threat is not going away, and each cask contains over a half the cesium-137 released in Chernobyl. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And the next number is number 3.
It's important to hold the physical copy of the ticket. I'm just kidding. Could you state your name for the record?
My name is Dan Wolf. I'm from Harwich on Cape Cod, and I also serve on the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel, so I'll see you all tomorrow night, and I really appreciate your being here. In case there are people that can't be there tomorrow night that are here tonight, we have heard expressed by numerous folks from our legislative delegation, the Attorney General's office, a real concern that there isn't sufficient funds. And we could go back and forth on that. It's conjecture, it's based on certain assumptions relative to economic returns on what's in the trust fund. So I guess I have a really specific question, and that is, what happens if there isn't? What happens if there is not specific funds? Where does the burden go?
Thank you.
The short answer is the licensee remains responsible for completing the decommissioning and providing the funds that are necessary to do that. So that would be a responsibility that if we were to grant the license transfer to WholeTech, they would be responsible for and for complying with the requirements.
Could I ask a follow-up question to that, please?
Sure. You had like 2 minutes left.
Okay,
so.
thanks. So I guess my question would be, is there any precedent or is there an ability to hold the original licensee liable in addition to WholeTech? There are layers of sort of corporate creation here that I think limit and insulate from liability. So I guess my question would be, is there a mechanism, is there a precedent, is there a way to keep Entergy potentially liable, or the investors in Entergy potentially liable, if the funds are insufficient? Because our concern is it goes to that entity, and of course the well is dry. And by the way, that is by design. That is by corporate design as far as how this is being constructed. Thank you very much.
Thank you again.
To the best of my knowledge, we don't have any precedent. We have had some sites go bankrupt, and we've worked with the trustee of the trust fund to complete the decommissioning. So there's no, once we complete our review, and if we were to transfer the license, there would be no going back to Entergy for the fund. So it's either they're going to be qualified to do that and accept that responsibility or not.
Next speaker will be number 4.
Hi, Diane Turco with Cape Town Winters. Being a good neighbor means taking care of each other and making decisions for the common good. Entergy has advertised itself as a corporation that is a good neighbor as long as there's money to be made. Now the plug will be pulled in June and the coffers will dry up. Entergy is running for the exit door and leaving their legacy mess behind. Entergy's PSDDAR calls for safe store, making Pilgrim a radioactive holding tank for 60 years. WholeTech calls for decom, prompt decommissioning using the decommissioning trust fund with exemptions. What is best for the community should be the priority of both their plans, but it is not. We all agree that prompt decommissioning is the best, but it must be done responsibly and safely. The following are our standards to meet the good neighbor requirements. With the IFSC holding tons of radioactive waste, there's still a potential for off-site release. The PSDAR must include emergency plans based on low probability, high consequence incidents such as terrorist attacks and be included in the environmental impact statement. Location of the IFSC pad must consider a technically defensible on-site storage location. That's not what we have now. Dry casts must be improved with quality and be able to be inspected, monitored, repaired, and are retrievable. Procedures must be in place for transfer of waste from any cracked or damaged canisters or casks, which may mean keeping the pool. Procedures and training for fuel transfer with certification of completion by the NRC prior to moving any fuel from the pool. Residual radiation levels must meet mass DPH standards and inclusion of independent oversight. Finally, we ask for an AGO inspection into WholeTech and its subsidiaries before any license transfer. As LLCs, this looks like a house of cards with no guarantee that available funds will be available to complete the job. The citizens of Massachusetts must have clear assurance that the taxpayers will not be left paying off the mess Entergy has left behind. Looking at WholeTech's record from recent events at San Onofre, near San Diego, confidence in their ability to make decisions based on protection of the public is questionable. An NRC special inspection report of a near drop of a full canister cited poor training, not following procedures, equipment problems, and mismanagement. Sound familiar? Poor management, poor training, poor procedure adherence, etc., has kept Entergy's operation in Pilgrim as the least safe in the U.S. still. This is like going from the frying pan into the fire. We don't need another corporation here with a poor safety culture that puts profit over public safety. We are concerned neighbors and will only support a responsible and safe decommissioning plan that protects our communities. If WholeTech is setting the standard at Songs, Cape Town Winders cannot support the transfer of license from Entergy at this time. You need to go back to the drawing board and do better for our communities.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker will be number 9.
Good evening, Richard Rothstein, Town of Plymouth resident and a new member of the State Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel. I asked a question during last week's webinar regarding Entergy's PSDAR for SafeStore about the anticipated timeline for when the NRC would allow the on-site meteorological towers to get dismantled during the decommissioning process under SafeStore. NRC couldn't answer that question only because it's a little bit too early in the process. So I just wanted to rephrase my question. Why is it important to have the on-site meteorological towers? They're important because of emergency planning purposes. In the event of a radiological emergency with the plant still operating, or once the plant is permanently shut down but spent fuel in the pool before it gets transferred, and even with the dry casks on site, if there were a radiological emergency or release, emergency responders would need to have that information to be able to make determinations of shelter in place versus emergency evacuation determinations there. This need doesn't disappear simply just because the plant is permanently shutting down. So to rephrase my question from last week, I'd be interested in learning about other plants that have decommissioned or in the process of decommissioning, and most using SafeStore at this point, but some are probably going to use Decon, on when the NRC allowed a licensee to dismantle the on-site meteorological towers. I don't expect to have that answer tonight, but certainly in the next few weeks, I'd be very interested in learning more about that history so we can see what circumstances did NRC require those towers to stay up longer, or other circumstances where they allowed a licensee to dismantle them sooner than later. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next speaker will be number 10.
Hello, my name is Stan Wallman, a resident of the town of Plymouth, and I'll disclose that I'm a retiree at Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station. I have one simple question for WholeTech. Based on the numbers you put up on the board, where are you going to make $89 million in 5 years? You need 1.54 billion, to decommission in your timeline. You have 105 now. If you're in the business to make money, where are you going to get an additional almost $90 million?
One moment.
There it is. Okay. Sorry about that. This is Andrea Sturgis, and the cash flow analysis that are included in both the license transfer application as well as the PSDAR for Decon demonstrate that the costs will be distributed over time, and it does accurately reflect the regulations regarding the trust fund increases over time.
I see. So I'll just quote a former presidential candidate that we're working with voodoo economics. Secondly, this whole situation here is like, almost looks like it's down pat that WholeTech will get a license transfer. What is the consequence of the NRC not approving the license transfer? We're going to have Entergy try to decommission and take 60 years. Is there a method or order or compulsion that can happen to have Entergy accelerate the process? Are we stuck with that if the license transfer is not approved? NRC question.
Come on. Okay. Yes. First of all, we are in the process of reviewing the WholeTech application and the associated financial and technical information that has been provided. So there's been no conclusion on that. Should we deny the application and not allow the transfer to take place, yes, Entergy would remain the licensee and be responsible for maintaining the plant in a safe condition. So we would continue to inspect, as we will if the license were transferred, the facility to ensure it's maintained safely, and regardless of the decon option or safe store option they choose. But the bottom line here is the licensee would continue to be Entergy, and their requirement is that they have to complete the decommissioning in 60 years.
Thank you.
Much. Would it be beneficial to people if we put back up the slide with one of the numbers instead of just looking at thank you, which I'm sure is very useful to all of you? Maybe either the Pilgrim numbers or the Entergy numbers or the WholeTech numbers, one of the two. Okay. Thanks for doing that.
Okay, next speaker will be number 14.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Henrietta Cosentino, resident of Plymouth and also chair of the League of Women Voters Nuclear Committee. And I thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate it. It's very important. I also want to say I appreciate greatly the speakers who came from the offices of our elected officials. It was very helpful to have their comments. I have a question, but I'll save it for last. My first is just a comment in total layman terms. We have two possibilities right now. On the one hand, we have WholeTech proposing to decommission in a very short amount of time, and for cheap, and phenomenally. It just sounds too good to be true. Particularly if you start to pay attention to the nature of the dry casks that are being proposed and the fact that these very same dry casks have been tremendously troublesome at San Onofre and probably in other places too. All of them scratched, being subject to erosion from salt water being stored on the beach. At least in San Onofre, the plan was, it's now suspended for a time, but the plan was to put these faulty casks in a vaulted system. Here in Plymouth, there's no proposal for any kind of vaulting, any kind of hard cover for these very vulnerable casks that could be subject to terrorism. We appreciate the moving of the ISFC, and that was important to us, but there is much more that needs to be done if WholeTech is to have the license. It's also very disturbing that WholeTech is requesting waivers for a certain amount of regulations, just as Entergy has been granted waivers for the computer security that was required for all other plants in the wake of Fukushima, waiver from the kind of hard valves that would make it safer. So this is disturbing. On the other hand, if we go with so-called, grotesquely called safe store, 60 years of decommissioning, this is surreal. We will all be gone 60 years from now. Every single one of us in this room, unless there is a very young person. And many of our children will be gone too. And I wonder who exactly is going to be in charge, what they will have been told, and so forth. Have I reached my limit of, okay, I stop there then.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker will be number 8.
Hi, I'm John Gawley. I'm from Hingham. I have an NRC information notice, 2012-20, that says that chloride-induced stress corrosion cracking of ostentatious, right? You get the right word? Stainless steel in dry cast storage systems. And there's a couple times that it happened in Sanofi, St. Lucie Nuclear Power Plant, Turkey Point, and through the wall at Krogerg Nuclear Power Station. Are these casts made out of this ostentatious steel? That's a question for the WholeTech. Austenitic, is it going to answer the question? Or? Austenitic, thank you. Are these casts made out of that? Because this document says that they've cracked from being near salt water. Need to hit a button or something?
I'm just going to phrase it. Would someone from the either Entergy or WholeTech like to answer that question?
Well, my concern is that the CEO says that if there is a crack, you couldn't fix it, right? So, and you might not be able to find it. But if there's no fuel pool, what do you do with that cast? So that's a question for WholeTech. Do we have a solution if there's a cast leaking? What are you going to do with it?
My name is Joy Russell. I think that Andrea did introduce me at the very beginning. First, I'd like to say that your information about canisters is incorrect. There are no leaking canisters in the United States. WholeTech's canisters do not leak. There's been no...
The steel has corroded.
That is incorrect, sir.
Okay, well, that's an NRC information docket number. So if you might want to check with them. I'm just going by what they have.
Okay. WholeTech's canisters have no evidence of stress corrosion cracking.
Really? All right, well, you might want to talk to them because they're putting stuff online that says they do. All right? And then the Sierra Club put a letter to the NRC as well. It's event number 51134, that WholeTech filled the Diablo Canyon canisters incorrectly, and half of them. Is that incorrect as well? Because there's stuff online you might want to cancel.
Sir, I beg to differ with you. That is also incorrect. The Diablo Canyon canisters, which were loaded by WholeTech on behalf of Pacific Gas and Electric, were all loaded correctly in accordance with our certificate of compliance.
Okay, well, somebody's got some. And the last thing is with NRC, are you considering deep isolation technology as well, besides just WholeTech's stuff? Because, I mean, we're getting one option here or two that sound pretty bad to me.
Well, let me just state that there is
stop my number.
There is a need in the country for a permanent repository of the spent fuel. The Department of Energy is responsible for developing and finding that site and using the proper technology. So it's really up to our policymakers in Washington to fund that activities and to allow them to do their work in identifying and developing a site and what technologies will be used with that. I think everybody is aware that there was some work in progress at the Yucca Mountain site in Nevada, and so that came to a halt, and so now it's up to the policymakers to reinstate the need or the promise they made for disposing of this material.
Okay. And my last question for WholeTech is that you have sent an application to the NRC for interim storage in Lee County, New Mexico. Does that mean you want to move this waste to New Mexico? Is that on your plan?
Sir, you're correct. WholeTech has submitted a license application to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to license a consolidated interim storage facility in southeast New Mexico. And if the facility is constructed, the the possibility of moving the fuel from here to that facility in New Mexico. That is correct.
All right, so the DOE says there's 5,000 train car incidents a year. Do you think that could be dangerous with stuff that's corroded from the ocean?
Sir, if I understand your question correctly, you're asking for my opinion if I think transportation of spent nuclear fuel is safe? Yes, I do. The industry does it on a regular basis. We have transported more than 1,380 shipments by rail, all safely, without any release of radioactive material.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we move on, since we do have some time, we kind of left that hanging there, that question. So just to clarify, so the members of the public don't go away potentially confused on this. Are the casts made out of this kind of steel, or if they're not, can we just state that for the record, just so, because we kind of moved on to the second question without answering the first. I just want to make sure, because it seemed like there was some confusion about that amongst the crowd.
Yes, the canisters are made out of austenitic stainless steel.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Next speaker will be number 11.
Hello, my name is Claire Miller. I'm the lead organizer with Toxics Action Center. We're a public health and environmental nonprofit founded in 1987. And while I don't consider myself to be an extremely young person, it is conceivable that I could live to 93. And I'm a community organizer, but I also happen to grow up, I was born and raised in Duxbury, Massachusetts, and so I want to speak a little bit more from the heart tonight. You know, at Toxics Action Center, we've really seen over our history that corporations go to very great lengths to avoid cleaning up their messes. And as a teenager, I have a lot of memories hearing about Pilgrim nuclear power plant. It's not every childhood that you learn your, home could be nuclear meltdown. My father's a curious man. He took tours of the nuclear power plant before they stopped doing that after 9/11. He told me stories about how the folks would say, "Oh, don't stand there. That you can't. That spot's hot." We also had a family friend who worked at a landscaping company, and I remember that my father and them joking about how the site was their hidden mysteries, and my distinct impression was that they weren't kidding, even though they were talking in a funny manner. So it really disturbs me that this isn't proceeding with extreme care to the data. And I want to say that it's extremely important to me that there's a comprehensive environmental analysis done on the entire site. We have to know really what's there. The second piece here is that, as corny as it may sound, we're in Hotel 1620. I am actually descended from a Pilgrim, and that's 15 generations of my family. And I have an intention to do well by this place. My descendants haven't always done well by this land, and I'd like to see 15 more generations. But that's only possible if we do an extremely good job. So it's very important to me that we honor the Commonwealth's desire for a cleanup standard of no less than 10. And the third thing that I am really sitting on as we're here is really around drinking water. It's so precious, and once it's contaminated, it's extremely difficult to fix. Toxics Action Center is working on countless communities across the region who don't have access to clean drinking water. And so as this continues, as the NRC oversees the future of this site, we have to ensure that there's clean drinking water, and we must meet the EPA's own standard of no less than 4 for the drinking water. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The next speaker will be number 7.
Hi, Joanne Corrigan. I live in Plymouth. I can ride my bike to the power plant. I've got a couple questions. First of all, that beautiful slide they showed of Yankee Row, how pastoral it looked after the decommissioning. Where are the spent fuel cast? Is that airbrushed or photoshopped?
No, that's an actual picture. It's the dry fuel storage facility is located above the river there on the hill.
Because Plymouth will never look like that. First of all, we have that nasty jetty that's ripped the sand off Priscilla Beach, and apparently that's staying there, even though the slides are saying how it goes back to the natural state and the environment. Isn't that right? Isn't WholeTech going to leave the jetty there? After the reactor cools, I know.
I guess WholeTech
for now.
can answer.
It is our plan to leave the jetty there.
That's what I thought. Okay, my other question, and I agree 100% with Mary Lambert, that you're moving the cast now. Finally, you figured out it's too close to the ocean. You didn't need a study. Just come down to Priscilla Beach during a full moon when there's a nor'easter, and you'll see the waves come crashing onto the street. Why they put those first ones so close is beyond me. First, now the way they're gonna move them, they're right out in the open of Rocky Hill Road. And what's to prevent, say, a dump truck with about 10 terrorists with RPGs or AR-15s with armor-piercing bullets from stopping there, jumping up, and not shooting at 100 casts, shooting at one cast? What's the chance of that being compromised and breached and releasing radiation?
I was looking for Will.
We, this, again, Joy Russell, in November, we presented at the Citizens Advisory Panel a very lengthy discussion. I personally did that with one of my colleagues about the safety and security that's offered by the WholeTech HighStorm 100 system that's in use at Pilgrim. And in that discussion, which you can go back and I believe see it online, I presented a long discussion about the cask's ability to withstand even an aircraft crash. So the system is very robust and it can withstand what you would have just described as beyond design basis scenarios.
I see. Well, my third comment is when Pilgrim was up and running and actually made money, Entergy still couldn't get them out of the column 4 degraded column. Didn't want to spend the money, didn't have the expertise, didn't have the enthusiasm, all of the above. What makes you think we are going to believe after the NRC gives them a pass on the cybersecurity, and everything, that now all of a sudden they're offline, they're not making money, and they're going to put in the resources, the money to keep us safe? I don't believe that for a minute. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker will be number 5.
But I'll make it very quick. I wanted to follow up on the comments. I'm sorry, Henrietta Cosentino.
Thank you.
Plymouth resident, League of Women Voters. I wanted to follow up on the many questions about finances and go back to Jim Lambert's question. Where is the regulation that actually holds the licensee responsible? Should the fund, the decommissioning trust fund, be inadequate? And along the way, what happens if the stock market crashes and 1.05 billion turns into 900 million or something of that sort? What happens then? Yes, what is the state of the trust fund right now?
Thank you.
Mike Toomey on behalf of Entergy. We provide a periodic update on the value of the trust fund, and we do not have an up-to-date number available this evening.
To follow up so we don't leave it like that. When do you provide these? So October was the last one. When would you provide the next one?
Well, we at least provide a number in March of every year as part of our annual disclosure to the NRC. I don't know if we will be providing one before March. And it's actually a March number. I think it actually comes out in April.
Okay, thank you.
It's worrisome because we've had some very serious major plummets in the market since October. But I want to go back to the first question and make sure you don't forget that Jim originally asked, is there a regulation that holds the licensee to its financial responsibilities? And if so, what is that regulation?
Again, thank you.
Yeah, let me respond. I'm sorry. The regulations for the decommissioning funding are spelled out in 5082. The actual requirement, if you're going to accept or apply for a license with the NRC, means that the licensee will be responsible for providing the decommissioning funds to restore the site and have the license terminated. Those are in I think it's 50.2. When a licensee applies for a license, there's something called the Common Defense Clause, which means you are accepting that responsibility when you apply for a license, and that you will be radiological and environmentally responsible for cleaning up the site when you're completed the work. They're still responsible for providing the funding, and that would be part of the process we would go through for getting the assets of the company and continuing the completion of the decommissioning.
Okay, so the question, we have two more, and then we can potentially do a second round, but the question that was posed from the floor, to which Bruce responded, was what happens if they go bankrupt? I just want to make sure we capture that for the transcript. So next up will be number 13.
Good evening. My name's Scott Gustafson. I'm a Plymouth resident. I'm happy to hear tonight that WholeTech is planning on going with the decon process and the expedited process. I'm here to support the license transfer to WholeTech because of their technical expertise. And as a representative of the Laborers International Union in North America, our union has worked extensively with WholeTech and their subsidiaries around the country, successfully, safely, efficiently. I don't know if some of the references to WholeTech tonight are accurate, because we've always worked closely with them. It's always been safe. It's always been very efficient. I have a brother and sister who are working down at Pilgrim now, or have worked on the last two projects with WholeTech down there. I don't hear anything about unsafe conditions. I hear that the job is going great. They're moving the fuel correctly, and they're very comfortable, and they're making a great living while they're doing it. The plant has always been an economic benefit to our town, and decommissioning this way will also be a strong economic benefit. I also want to say that WholeTech works extensively with our international union and has helped us develop a state-of-the-art rad worker training program, and we train workers in our state-of-the-art facilities here in New England, in Hopkinton and Pomfret, Connecticut. And over the years, our members have decommissioned Maine Yankee, Connecticut Yankee, and the Yankee Row plant, which I actually go rafting up there, tubing up there in that river. It's a beautiful site. I go up there every year. Doesn't bother me at all. I'm happy that it's going to be the expedited decommissioning and return that site back to its beauty that it once was for the town of Plymouth. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the last speaker on the list will be number 6.
My name is Susan Carpenter with Cape Town Winders, and I live in South Dennis on the Cape. I have a comment, and then I have 2 questions. At one of the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel meetings, WholeTech spoke and said that they have an impeccable safety record. On the other hand, the fact that that near drop on the West Coast occurred kind of defies their claim that they have an impeccable record. And not only that, but it was a whistleblower that brought this to public attention. And my questions are, is it a conflict of interest for WholeTech to buy WholeTech casks to store the nuclear waste?
I guess that's a commercial thing that the NRC would not get into, but I don't see any real issue with it. It is what their product line is and what they're offering, and I assume that they will use that, do the work safely and compliantly with the license requirements for the certificate of compliances, and we'll be there to inspect to make sure that they are.
Okay, and my other question was, how many sites has WholeTech decommissioned? And by that, I don't mean as a contractor, excluding that. How many sites has WholeTech decommissioned?
WholeTech International has not decommissioned any sites. However, that said, we have hired the Comprehensive Decommissioning International CDI, which is a company that includes SNC-Lavalin, and they have a rich history of decommissioning nuclear plants and other nuclear facilities.
Thank you.
That was Joy Russell of WholeTech, just for the purposes of the transcript. All right, we've now exhausted, as you can see. This is really good handwriting for me. I'm going to pat myself on the back for this. We've now opened it up. Whatever, I'll take what I can get. To people who have not yet spoken this evening. So we don't have an established order, but I think Pine raised her hand first, and then we'll just go around, okay? So again, we'll do 3 minutes apiece, and then if we have enough time left over, people may get to do a second round, but let's go first with people who have not yet had opportunity to speak. So I turn it over to you.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here. I want to state clearly that I hope WholeTech succeeds. I hope Entergy is happy. And I hope the NRC finally wraps its head around sea level rise, which you are not doing. And that is pretty plain with your reliance on the SEIC and the GEIR. There is no basis at all for you to accept Entergy's proposal to wait 60 years to clean up the site. That's plainly a fraud. Take a look at the 4th National Climate Assessment that was released in late October, November. You will see Chapter 18 in the Northeast. You will see that our worst case scenario is by 2100 we have sea level rise of 11.5 feet. That's the new estimate. But daily, things are changing so fast, and the scientists are learning so much that adjustment continues. It is important to the public trust that you regulators and you contractors and Entergy, our overlord, takes care of us and looks at that. Cleaning up the site does not mean letting it wash into Cape Cod Bay. And in 60 years, that's what's going to happen. Even if there's not inundation on the site, the groundwater level will be so high that you will not be able to safely and effectively get the contamination out of the ground. If it goes into the environment, the NRC is failing in its mission to protect the environment and the people. So is WholeTech as a reputable company, I will say. So is Entergy as a reputable company. You need to address this. The PSDAR for Entergy does not. The WholeTech PSDAR does not. And if they run out of money and the cleanup is delayed, we're all in a stew. So please, NRC, Bruce, take another look at your regulations. Give a try at updating that. call in those scientists that worked for the government that wrote that report, and get on the reality page. We're living with it here. Stick around on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Stay here. Go down to the plant then and see what happens. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Again, that was Pine Dubois. Just please state your name for the record before you begin. So Pine Dubois with the handicap. Thank you. Again,
I'm Ed Russell, an elected town meeting member in Plymouth. And when businesses and as well as governmental agencies engage in big contracts, they usually see to it that there's a bond produced that will guarantee the performance of the contract. And so I'd like to know why that isn't possible here.
Performance bonds are used frequently. If we deem that there's sufficient funds to do the decommissioning, we have no need to require them. I think in the recent VY transfer, Vermont Yankee asset sale and license transfer, one of the conditions we put on, or the agreement that we got from North Star, was to provide an additional financial assurance. I think it was along the lines of $30 million to make sure there was sufficient funds. So that's, if it's not required, then they're not required. So it's up to the agreement between the sales also to come up with the proper financial information and guarantees.
That's your version of risk assessment, but we citizens here have a different assessment of the risk. And when you do have a contract that's just barely enough to cover and could well exceed the funds available, I would say a prudent entity would look for a bond. And if there is, as you say, a low risk, then the bond should not be that expensive. So I'd like to see that happen.
Thank you.
So my name is Bruce Gellerman. I have a question. What happens to the 1,200 acre site? Who owns it? And are there plans for development? And if so, where can we find those? And are there elaborate schemes?
This is Mike Toomey on behalf of Entergy. When you say the 1,200 acres, I assume you mean the 1,200 acres of undeveloped property across Rocky Hill Road,
yes.
Correct? That property currently is owned by Entergy. It is included in the sale to WholeTech, and if the license transfer application is approved and the transaction closes, WholeTech will become the owner of the 1,200 acres. And I have not heard about any specific plans for development of that site at this time, but they would be the owner of the land after the transaction closes, if it closes.
Does WholeTech have plans for the development of the site? And will it be paying, I assume it'll be paying property taxes going forward?
No specific plans for that property have been defined at this time, and yes, we will be paying the appropriate property taxes on that site.
Thank you for your questions.
Yes, I'm Lawrence Delafield. I'm a resident of the town of Plymouth, a town meeting member, and the president of the Six Ponds Association, which is a local organization very close to the site. And of course, my concern is this: we live in an area that will be in danger until this material is totally removed from the site. Why do we have to wait that long? How can we possibly get that moved up so that it's removed quicker, or at least provided a major incentive to remove all items from the site, because we will not be safe until that happens?
Thank you. Okay. Is there anyone else who has not yet spoken who would like to speak this evening? Going once. Going twice. All right. Is there anyone who has spoken this evening who would like to speak again?
Jim Lambert, resident of Duxbury. I'd just like to spend a moment on comments, and if I'm wrong on any of what I say, I would ask that the NRC, Entergy, or WholeTech correct me. My understanding of the transaction as described in the license transfer application is that WholeTech Pilgrim will be the owner of the site and will be the one who owns the decommissioning trust fund. In WholeTech's license transfer and PSDAR applications, it says that, quote, the existing decommissioning trust funds provide the appropriate basis for the financial qualifications of WholeTech Pilgrim. It also says that WholeTech, quote, WholeTech Pilgrim will be required to pay for HDI's costs of post-shutdown operations, including all decommissioning costs at Pilgrim, close quote. It seemed very clear from that the only potential financial responsibility of WholeTech Pilgrim, and that is the only one we need to focus on because they are the only licensee, depends entirely on the decommissioning trust fund. It also seems clear, listening to Mr. Watson, that a statement in a regulation that a licensee that frankly has no money and is bankrupt is, quote, responsible, close quote, provides absolutely no assurance that that licensee will pay. It frankly doesn't have any money, and that unless I have missed something that Mr. Watson has said, and I asked the question earlier, there is absolutely nothing in NRC rules, regulations, or pertinent law that would permit the NRC to enforce the licensees and their parents' responsibility to pay for what they caused. Am I correct?
Try and respond a little bit here. We owe you a response to your question on the ownership. The only comment I can really make at this point, we owe you a response with the responsible regulations. I have to go to our Office of General Counsel for that.
And I would appreciate your doing that.
Yeah, no, we have to do that. The other issue is that we are currently reviewing the license application or plan to start on that very soon. So we really can't pass any judgment other than the general process we're using in the general requirements for the decommissioning funding and how they would apply to the license transfer. We're still doing our review, so we haven't concluded anything, and so your comments are valid to that review, and so I'm sure the staff will take that into account.
And I would ask that if in a review or in further conversations with WholeTech, the NRC or its staff discovers any way in which there in fact is an enforceable commitment or an agreement that people who have money will set that money up to pay for the shortfall, I would like to hear about it, and it's quite clear that the Massachusetts Attorney General would also like to hear about it.
Thank you again.
Yeah, if I may briefly, just Mr. Lambert introduced his remarks by saying that if we didn't say anything, it meant that we agreed with him, and I can't agree to that, just at least on behalf of Entergy. On behalf of Entergy.
Richard Rothstein, two questions, one for Mr. Watson, Dr. Watson, excuse me, and one for our WholeTech representative, Joy. Dr. Watson, can you qualitatively explain or define, for purposes of releasing the site license, site restoration, what basically is included what would not be included in the case of the Entergy site, so that people don't get false expectations one way or another?
The decommissioning fund requirements from the NRC are for the radiological decommissioning. So once we would terminate the license after verifying the radiological conditions of the site, we have an independent contractor we use in many cases to help us with the surveys and verify the radiological residual radioactivity levels at the site. We would terminate the license. If the license site restoration is not in the requirements by NRC, because there's a number of approaches you can take to decommissioning, many of them take into account removing the buildings and turning it back into greenfield. If they submit that to us in their license termination plan, then that's the plan they follow because it's a license amendment. If they choose to do things which some of the other power plants have done, such as Trojan or Rancho Seco, where they actually terminate the license but leave buildings and stuff still remaining on the site, that's their choice. And after that, it's up to the owner of the facility or the licensee, and at that point they're no longer a licensee but the owner of the property and the state to determine when and where they should do the final decommissioning and site, I should say, final site restoration and what those requirements are.
Okay, thank you. I had the pleasure of sitting in the WholeTech Pre-Decisional Enforcement Conference last Wednesday, I believe it was, the 4-hour, and more nuts and bolts were discussed than I could fit in my car. I wanted to commend WholeTech on its dry cask presentation to the ENDICAP last fall. I thought it was very informative, and I believe it's on the ENDICAP website. Just expanding upon Ms. Lampert's comment earlier about cracks not being able to be fixed in the multi-purpose canister at this day and age, one thing I was envisioning, given that premise, as WholeTech, for purposes of future design considerations to remedy that kind of unsolvable problem at the moment, considered constructing a larger multi-purpose cask there to go over the cracked cask, such that, and then of course that slightly larger cask could be filled with helium gas as a coolant and sealed, and then that larger cask would then, or that larger multi-purpose cask with a cracked inside of that, of the other cask, multi-purpose cask, getting into a larger overpack if it need be, with the air vents too. So is that a possible design solution that may be on the drawing board from WholeTech?
That's a very good explanation. It's very close to what we've actually designed for recovery of a canister in the event the inspections were to show that there has been a degradation. So indeed, that is the approach, is to put it into another overpack, but an overpack, not necessarily the canister as you've described. So you're on the right track, sir. It is definitely an additional overpack that we are going to use.
Glad to hear that. Can you tell me who I write to at WholeTech to get some royalties?
Right, royalties and to get on the patent.
Are you, Mary, are you asking, just so we get on the transcript, are you asking whether the current canister or the overpack can be shipped?
If there is a damaged canister, current regulations allow shipment of such.
Okay, so
You have the Russian doll, and the Russian doll leaves the site.
I should have just given you the microphone. Instead of, so essentially, if it can, a cylinder which has been, or canister which has been compromised or degraded, do the regulations allow it to be shipped? Is a question that was posed by Ms. Lambert.
The regulation question, I defer to the NRC.
I asked Jason Piotr, who's our senior engineer for spent fuel safety, to come up and give you an answer for that.
The regulations are performance-based, and so if you had a canister that had a demonstrated flaw like you're talking about, there would have to be an engineering analysis that was done to determine what the best way to mitigate that particular flaw would be. I can't answer the question right now whether or not it would be allowed to be shipped, because we don't have any scenarios where there are flaws such as you described. So it's a case-by-case basis depending upon what the situation is for the canister that you're talking about. But it would have to be evaluated prior to transport. It couldn't just be put into a transport overpack and sent. So it would have to be an engineering analysis prior to that activity.
I just want to go back to the WholeTech in San Onofre because it could be our future. Diane Turco with Cape Town Winters. At San Onofre, they've been loading, WholeTech has been loading canisters in underground vaults on the beach. The sea level rise is eventually going to leak into the bottom of those vaults. They have been loading them and scratching them. And there was a special inspection by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and it sounded almost like an Entergy special inspection report, pretty much the same. So I want to know, and the people in California have said, let them know the public in Southern California is asking the WholeTech system to be recalled. It's a lemon, and WholeTech is making loading errors due to mismanagement and bad engineering design that the NRC admits it cannot fix. So that's what's happening out in California. So I have two questions. Number one, how can you come to the NDCAP meeting and say that WholeTech has an impeccable safety record when this was all exposed by a whistleblower? And number two, would you conduct an environmental impact study including sea level rise and acts of malfeasance on the spent fuel pad?
Can you repeat the first question again?
Let me try it this way. How could you with a straight face tell the NDCAP that WholeTech has an impeccable safety record when we know what's going out at San Onofre?
I appreciate the question. I understand your concern. Let me just state, WholeTech does have an impeccable safety record. And the issue that happened at San Onofre, which was reported by the licensee, who is the Southern California Edison nuclear plant, they went through their process. So WholeTech does have an impeccable safety record. I absolutely can emphatically say that.
Did Southern Edison report this incident when it happened to the NRC?
Those questions are best given
okay, no, they did not.
Southern
and you can
Cal
look up on the
Edison.
record, they did not. No. Actually, the NRC, that's initiated the special inspection, right, Mr. Watson?
From what I understand, the licensee was a little late in responding to the requirements, and so based on that, we escalated our inspections to evaluate the situation.
Thank you. It was a whistleblower.
But it was not a whistleblower that submitted the complaint.
This is Mike Toomey on behalf of Entergy. Well, let me just, one thing I think, just to clear up any confusion for those who don't know as much about the issues as some of the recent speakers, one thing that's important to note here is that if Entergy remains the owner of the facility, we will be using the WholeTech dry fuel storage system. If WholeTech becomes the owner, they will be using the WholeTech dry fuel storage system. So the license transfer will have no impact on what system is used at Pilgrim for storing spent nuclear fuel. It will be the WholeTech dry fuel storage system that we use or they use. And I don't know how that relates to the scope of this particular proceeding, but I do want to make sure that people understand that it's not an either or. It's not like if WholeTech becomes the owner, that's the only circumstance under which the WholeTech system will be used. That very same system will be used if we remain the owner. I just want to clear that up for anybody who may not understand that.
Right, because the point is it's both mismanagement, poor equipment, ongoing problems. But the second question was, would environmental impact study include sea level rise and acts of malfeasance on the ISFC pad?
First, I want to emphatically state that the system that's in use at San Onofre is markedly different than the one that's in use at Pilgrim. You're comparing apples to oranges. It is correct. It's an above-ground system versus an underground system.
Oh, no,
They're
no,
not
that's
the
not
same
my
dry
question.
storage system.
That's not my question.
And therefore,
not my
there
question.
isn't a probability of an issue as you have at San Onofre with water collection in the bottom of the system.
Okay.
It can happen because they're two different systems.
Right, but what I'm asking is, would you include sea level rise on for the property, as Pine spoke about, I mean, and storm surges and acts of malfeasance? That's my question.
The dry storage systems are licensed under Part 72, and they're deployed under Part 72 currently. And they're already being deployed in accordance with the regulatory requirements. There's no additional investigation or analyses that need to be performed for the dry storage systems.
I get that we're having a back and forth, but if you know you're going to keep talking, just for the sake of our poor transcriptionist, who, let's not make it, he is not the object of your concern, so let's make his life easier. So just speak into the microphone when you're asking questions, okay? And the question there was, would you include sea level rise and acts of malfeasance in an environmental assessment or impact statement?
We'll meet the regulations. The dry spent fuel storage system is already deployed, and it will continue to be deployed no matter whether this license transfer application occurs or not. I don't understand the question of the need for additional environmental studies related to dry storage.
You're building a new storage facility there, a brand new storage facility. Right now, you can drive onto the property, past the no trespassing signs, and eyeball the dry casks. Now you're moving them closer to Rocky Hill Road. We need to be assured that there's going to be some increased security there. So that's just a question. Are you going to be looking at acts of malfeasance when you do the new pad?
The security that's already at the nuclear plant, I allow Entergy to talk to. The security of the dry storage system under the license under Part 72 has already been established. There's no additional requirements that need to be addressed.
This is Mandy Halter on behalf of Entergy. The independent spent fuel storage installation facilities are required to be secure. And with the newly located pad, there will continue to be a physical barrier behind an intrusion detection system and monitored 24/7 by armed security. And that's correct, that's all I can talk about, due to safeguards.
Sheila Lynch Benton in Duxbury. I have a question about regional public safety. In the last 40+ years, Entergy was required to do a regional public safety plan, and they've applied with their PSDAR to abandon that regional planning. And we are concerned about WholeTech taking over. What is your plans for notifying regional safety folks like firemen, et cetera, on safety, particularly with the expedited 4-year plan that you presented tonight?
This is Andrea Sturgis. We will continue to comply with all NRC regulation, and I want to emphasize that it is WholeTech's top priority to maintain the health and safety of the public.
But what I'm asking in particular is, what is your plan to reach out to regional safety folks like firemen and regional coordinators as your expedited 4-year plan is ongoing?
And again, I will emphasize that we will maintain the health and safety of the public, and we will be complying with all regulations.
And my second question is, can NRC add to their PSDR another level of regional safety outreach to public safety officials?
If I understand your question correctly, there's no need to add anything because the site is still going to maintain an emergency plan and emergency response capabilities along with security response plans, which have those communication tools in them that they're required to have. So they're going to continue those things as till the decommissioning is complete. So there's really no need to change those plans. Now, I can't specifically talk to the regional plan. I'm not familiar with it. It was not an NRC requirement that I know of, but there are requirements for notification and getting security, police support, also fire protection and fire response, medical emergencies and medical responses to the site. And so those things all stay in place.
But Entergy has requested that they be discontinued in the regional capacity.
All I know is they have to meet the minimum requirements for the NRC, which means they will maintain the ability to talk with, get notification and get response capabilities from local and state law enforcement. They will continue to deal with to communicate with the local fire departments and rescue squads.
Will they be required to
The
coordinate?
regional, there's no NRC requirement for a regional response plan. There is one for the immediate location around the plant.
Thank you.
Claire Miller from Toxics Action Center. I'm getting a little bit agitated because this really matters a lot to me. And if I understand what Diane is bringing up correctly in your response, Ms. Russell, it's kind of hard to read your name tag from here, sorry if I got that wrong, is that we have rapidly changing data on climate change, the impacts of sea level rise that are, getting worse every time they're updated. We have someone in the White House who's changing world politics and dynamics rapidly, and we are living in an age in which terrorism is ever present. And we want to know, are you willing to go above and beyond if necessary, or are you only willing to do as much as like the floor of what's required? Because what I hear Diane asking is, are you willing to go above and beyond and protect our health, our community? And what I hear you saying back is, we're doing what's written. We're gonna follow. We're just gonna do what's necessary. What the law is. Am I understanding correctly? You're committing to the floor.
I just want to respond to that in that the NRC regulations are fully provide for safety for the people working at the plant, the public, and the environment. And so complying with those is one demonstration that the plant is maintained safe, and we'll continue to inspect that plant against those requirements.
I have no doubt that the NRC is doing the best that it can to protect the health and safety of my community. I also know that we're in a rapidly changing world, and I'm interested to know if WholeTech is committing to the floor of what the NRC, like where we're at with the last time those laws were passed, those statutes, those regulatory processes were went through, those elaborate commenting periods, or if they're committing to respond to an ever-present, fast-changing world of climate change and terrorism.
I think what you're asking me is, am I confident that our dry spent fuel storage system is safe?
No, that's not what I'm asking you at all. It's not what I'm asking you at all.
I am personally convinced. I'm a nuclear engineer. I'm part of the design team that designed this dry storage system. And I am confident in its robustness. I'm confident that we have gone above and beyond to ensure that we've selected materials, that we've selected the methodologies, and we've done the absolute utmost we can to ensure the health and safety.
I have no doubt that you're sincere.
May I please finish? I live by these nuclear plants as well. Yeah. And I am confident that when I go to visit these plants, I live by these plants, I live by where our dry storage systems are deployed. I am personally confident that my company has done everything it can to go above and beyond, and therefore I have answered your question.
It wasn't my question in the slightest. I do believe you're 100% sincere when you say that. I also believe that the engineers who worked on Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima were also really sincere in believing that their plants were safe as well. I just want to say for the record, you didn't answer my question.
So Bruce Gellerman again. My question is to WholeTech. As I understand the fund, it can go up and down. It's like a 401k, right? It's an investment vehicle. What happens if it goes down? And also, could you or would you sue the Department of Energy, as others have done, for failing to take the waste off site? Would you plan to do that? Are you?
Well, let me respond to the first part. Yes, there are market changes. The trust fund is in a independent trust with an independent trustee. Most of them are with Mellon Bank of New York. So the trustee has certain requirements on them to make conservative investments to protect the fund. Secondly, all the licensees that are storing fuel, I'll say broadly, everyone, has the ability to request or sue, if they have to, the Department of Energy to get the costs back for the storage of the nuclear fuel. So I'm sure Entergy has done that in the past for their plants. I'm sure WholeTech will do the same to recoup the costs. Those costs are then available for doing other activities at the sites, and so that's part of the agreement with the federal government.
2 points. NRC is giving exemptions so the DTF can be used for spent fuel management costs. Now go back, the Decommissioning Trust Fund was established when we were a utility structure, when Boston Edison was the owner, by ratepayers. Since that time, it's grown from investments. Entergy didn't put a dime in it. WholeTech won't put a dime in it, okay? Then they will sue DOE to recoup what they've spent on spent fuel management costs, okay? What they've spent by taking it out of the Decommissioning Trust Fund. But then when they get the money out of DOE, there's no requirement to put it back. If there is, please correct me and give me the regulation. Instead, they put it in their pocket. And that's, you know, if I were WholeTech, I'd say, I'm going to make a pile of money doing this, and that's part of the incentive to take over the license. It would seem to me that the NRC would get on the stick and make some sort of requirement, regulation, that it goes back into the Decommissioning Trust Fund to refurbish what they've taken out. Because there's no requirement, correct that. And then I just want to sum up by saying the points brought forward on sea level rise, the points brought forward on the increased risk of terrorism, of cyber attack. Now that's a big one when you think of the spent fuel pool. All these new and significant information that you should be responsible. NRC require that they do a NEPA review and then not say what is blatantly foolish. It's a lie to say the 202 generic environmental impact statement and the 206 impact statement done during relicensing bounds environmental impact, so we can all skip along and say it's a clean site, we've done our job, so they really don't have to spend a dime, and all the stuff can go on Cape Cod Bay. Dilution's the solution.
Thank you. I just want to make one comment that the decommissioning funds that are, or excuse me, the spent fuel funds that are recuperated from the Department of Energy, I think it's 5082, Mike, in the regulations, the money goes back into the fund? No, it doesn't? Okay. Okay.
It goes to the company?
Okay, well, I'm sorry. I appreciate the comment then, to look at that.
Before you begin, is there anyone else in the audience who has not yet had an opportunity to speak who would like to do so? Okay, please. Would you mind letting her go first and then, okay, thank you, sir. Your name for the record, please.
Joanne Geary. I live a mile from the plant. I've been here since I was 16, so I saw it built by people that shouldn't be building it. But that's not my question. My question is twofold. First of all, Entergy owns it, correct? Got the license, owns all the property. How much is it worth? What's the property worth? What did Entergy get or might get from WholeTech? The cost, the dollars. Are you selling it for money? So there's no money exchange. Entergy walks away, WholeTech, if it gets licensed, walks in, correct? So why does WholeTech want this? Well, that's my question. Why does WholeTech want this really horrible thing to fix? We've got thousands of people on the line, so what's the deal? Why are you doing this? No answer?
This is Andrea Sturgis, and I will make this a personal response. As a mother of 2 children and a grandmother of 4 children, I am committed to us doing in this industry what is right, and that is to take care of our plants when they're past their operational life expectancy, and to turn that property back into a useful piece of property in the community. So that is my personal reason for being involved in this project.
But it's in it for the money. So the money, you're going to own 12,000 acres, 1,200 acres. You've got a big hill there that hasn't been developed. Why not move all this terrible spent fuel to the top of the hill? You're going to move it away from the ocean, or bury it in the hill. I don't know, a better solution than moving it next to Rocky Hill Road, which I go by every day. So, I mean, it just seems simple solution. If you can't move it away, move it in a safer area. But again, you're going to be making big bucks here. So we want to be safe. That's all I have to say.
Before we begin, because we do have, I'm sorry for interrupting you again, sir, just because we do have extra time available to us, I don't usually intervene like this, but I think there's some confusion out there regarding what's the financial arrangement between, and I'm not asking in specific terms, but what's the financial relationship between WholeTech and Entergy? And I think the question was asked, like, how would WholeTech benefit from this transaction? And I think if we could answer that, that would go a long way to clearing up some of the confusion in the audience.
Well, this is Mike Toomey for Entergy. I'll address the specific question of the way the transaction's structured. Entergy is receiving only nominal consideration. And I have to say, I don't have the number in front of me. We just recently closed the Vermont Yankee transaction, and the nominal consideration there was $1,000. And we receive nominal consideration. WholeTech receives title to the plant, or they're actually buying Entergy Nuclear Generation Company through an equity sale. They get that company, which owns the plant, has the decommissioning trust fund, and the liability for the decommissioning. So what Entergy gets out of the transaction is $1,000, and we are no longer involved in the decommissioning of the plant. In the same way that Boston Edison is not involved in the decommissioning of the plant, right? We're going to transfer that responsibility to WholeTech, and WholeTech will receive the project, the plant, the decommissioning trust fund, and the work associated with it. And I'll let WholeTech describe why they would be willing to take this work on as other companies have taken it on in other parts of the country.
Again, this is Joy Russell from WholeTech. WholeTech is and has been for 30 years an industry leader in safe and secure storage of spent nuclear fuel. We also have other business endeavors, such as designing a small modular reactor, and as we pointed out this evening, we also have submitted an application to establish a consolidated interim storage facility in southeast New Mexico. WholeTech is committed to the nuclear industry, and unfortunately, part of that also includes the safe decommissioning of nuclear power plants. We recently built our third manufacturing facility here in the United States. We now have 1.4 million square feet of manufacturing space here in the United States. We're the largest exporter of nuclear products. And again, that's a demonstration of our commitment to the nuclear industry. So that is WholeTech's reason for taking the next step and to acquire shuttered nuclear plants and to safely decommission those, and to take the ownership of the spent nuclear fuel, which is also our core expertise, and to manage that as it remains either on site or is moved to New Mexico.
Thank you. And thank you, sir, for indulging me for that minute.
Got all the time in the world. Final question for Dr. Watson. I was hoping that NRC's proposed revised decommissioning regulations were going to come out last November, as originally envisioned, and that final promulgation would have taken place sometime in the first half of this year. Notwithstanding the current government shutdown, what is NRC's ETA for when it was envisioning getting these proposed and final regulations out? And a second question is, licensees who have submitted their PSDARs, even if they're in the process of being evaluated, or and NRC said, okay, they're good enough so you can start the decommissioning process once the plant is permanently shut down, would existing licensees in those circumstances get grandfathered separate from the new regulations for decommissioning, or would it be like, for example, a post-Fukushima order there where NRC says, okay, we've come up with this in the new regulations, therefore all licensees must do blank, blank, blank for decommissioning, regardless of what was in your PSDAR?
Let me respond to the rulemaking schedule. The proposed decommissioning rulemaking that's been in progress over the last few years, the staff made its scheduled requirement to submit to the commission the proposed rules and the basis for those proposed rules back in May. As many of you may know, we also had two new commissioners appointed by the administration, and based on that, they've been taking care of the backlog of information or voting issues that they have on their plates. So the staff is waiting for the commission to do their job, so it's the commission's priority to address their work at their own schedule. So the staff is waiting for the commission to vote on it. We have not received a schedule when that vote is to take place, and so we are basically at the mercy of the commission from meeting the timeliness requirements they had originally placed on us to have these rules in place by the end of 2019. So we will hopefully get a resolve the issue with the commission vote. That will give us the direction on how we are to proceed with the proposed rules. One of the proposed evaluations was looking at the PSDARs. If there is a change in the regulations that the commission wants concerning the PSDARs, then we will issue the regulations and the guidance with that, and anybody that would come out in the future would have to comply with the new regulations. Since the plants that are already in decommission have submitted their PSDR, if they were to revise that, we would believe they would have to, at least I would believe that they would have to comply with the new requirements. So I think I answered both questions, but we're at the mercy of the commission and their vote scheduling, and apparently they have more pressing issues than the decommissioning rulemaking.
Jim Lambert, Duxbury. I've spent a lot of time thinking and trying to figure out the answer to the question, why would WholeTech get into this? And in addition to the fact that it's your business, I think the obvious answer is they expect to make a profit. And if you ask yourself on what basis do they expect to make this profit, a number of things that I think are fairly clear if you look at the whole picture come to mind, and to the extent anybody, your WholeTech disagrees with me and you think you can, consistent with limitations on what you can say, correct me, please do so. The first is they obviously think they're a great deal more efficient at doing this type of thing than Entergy ever will be. The second is they want to get the decommissioning done early to avoid the risk of drastically increasing costs that could be, destructive is a nice word, if they waited the period of time that Entergy was planning to wait. The third is that I was told by a WholeTech representative that their profit is included in the costs you see in their PSDAR. And last, just talking to various people in the industry, my understanding is that before someone will get into something like this, they really need a fairly clear path to what they see as a 25 to 35% profit.
Thank you.
Susan Carpenter with Cape Town Windows. This has nothing to do with money, but it has to do with ethics. Recently, I know that WholeTech changed the design of its cast for San Onofre and did not notify anyone, and that it really took the Southern California Edison and Entergy by surprise. And I'm wondering if WholeTech, having basically gotten away with it because it was eventually approved, if they feel that they can do that here, or if there's a likelihood they'll do that in the future, and we'll end up with something different than what we've negotiated for.
The statements that you just made, I need to disagree with. They're incorrect. I'll correct them. The design of the system was not changed for San Onofre. Actually, the amount of time it would take me to actually correct all of your statements is going to exceed the time we have, and I would hate to do that for other speakers have an opportunity to speak. I recommend that you go back and listen to the NRC's PEC conference that was held last Wednesday, the 9th of January. It explains the entire process, but you've incorrectly characterized that.
May I send you the article where I got the information?
I didn't hear what she said.
She must send you the article. There she goes.
Make she send you the article where she learned of this information.
Absolutely.
Just to clarify for the transcript, the PEC video, I hope I'm not misstating this, is available on the NRC website. I think it's video.nrc.gov will be the quickest way of getting there.
This is the Orange County Register. And the title is NRC and WholeTech to face off publicly over redesign of spent fuel canisters at San Onofre plant. I'm wondering if, are they wrong in their headline?
I'm sorry, read me the headline again.
NRC and WholeTech to face off publicly over redesign of spent fuel canisters at San Onofre plant.
The headline is misleading. We didn't redesign the canister for San Onofre. And again, it's a lengthy discussion, and it's all captured in a video that from the PEC conference on January 9th, where WholeTech had a meeting at the NRC headquarters.
From what I understood, the difference in the canisters was there was a layer of, down at the bottom, there were bolts added, and that the design was only discovered when one of the bolts was loose in a canister.
Again, this is, you're making misstatements, and we could go back and forth all evening on this. I recommend that you get your facts from this PEC video from the January 9th meeting.
Okay, and I will recheck with the newspaper as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Lawrence Delafield again. I didn't really get an answer to my question, so I'd like to restate it in a slightly different way. The question, and it was a question, is there any way at this point in this process that we could require that the material be removed and put in a secure facility someplace else, such as you're talking about doing in New Mexico, and get it away from the community, because we will not be safe until that happens? Or if that's not the case, is there any way to give an incentive so that it gets removed faster and moved to another location? I did not receive an answer to that, so I'd appreciate getting an answer. Thank you.
This is Mike Toomey on behalf of Entergy. I'll answer that because we're the current owner of the facility. I believe what your question is, when you talk about the material, you're referring to the spent nuclear fuel. And the answer to that is the United States federal government is responsible for removing the spent nuclear fuel from the Pilgrim site and every other nuclear site in the country. And the federal government has repeatedly breached its obligation to do so. And many of us have been required, not personally, but Entergy has been required to sue the federal government for failing to fulfill its obligation. So the only answer I can give you is that I know there were some representatives of some federal congressmen here tonight, is to talk to them about when the federal government is going to fulfill its obligation to remove spent nuclear fuel from the Pilgrim site as well as the other sites in the U.S.
All right, so it's 8:47. We're scheduled to go to 9 p.m. Is there anyone who has not yet spoken, would like to make any additional comments before we close this out? Going once, going twice. All right, before I turn it over to Bruce to close out the meeting, I would just like to thank all of you for attending personally from the facilitators, and to say out on the registration table there are feedback forms. Donna and I would greatly appreciate you filling those out. We use your feedback in trying to make these meetings better in terms of public process, so please take a couple minutes to do so. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bruce. Thank you.
Well, the first thing I want to thank you is coming out tonight. I know this is a important issue to many of you. Your comments will inform the staff on the NRC's review of the PSDAR. I heard some very good comments for our consideration. And then when we look at the license transfer request in the application and its PSDAR, those comments can also be taken into account there. As a reminder, you can provide written comments. I believe it's through March 21st. We will be publishing the Federal Register notice on the license transfer when the rest of the federal government goes back to work. The comment period, again, is going to be 30 days for that and 20 days for hearing. So you're hearing about it early before the notice is published. So we look forward to your comments. Again, I want to thank you and for your comments and questions. We will be at least I will be, and a couple of the other NRC people will be at the Massachusetts Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel tomorrow evening. So I'm sure we'll be having some more discussions on the topic. So with that, I would thank our panelists and our presenters for their presentations and answering questions where we could. And so with that, I would adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.